Freedom Scientific, a Vispero brand.
Okay, let's talk about a feature in JAWS called Speech and Sounds Manager, or Speech and Sound Schemes. This is one of those features that's been around for quite a few years, many different versions of JAWS, but is oftentimes overlooked by most users or not even known about at all by many users. But really, it can be a very powerful tool in your quest to become more efficient when using the computer. So let's dive in and learn a little bit about it and see how it works. A speech and sound scheme is a way to really define exactly what kind of information JAWS will give you about what it's reading. In other words, things about the font that the text is in, or the color, or the style, all kinds of those visual things that we often may not get spoken with JAWS by default. We can set up a speech and sound scheme to speak that information or communicate that information as we're reading through text. So an example might be if you're reading a Word document, as you're moving through that document, JAWS is not by default going to tell you exactly what the font size is or the font color or the font style. It won't tell you whether it's bolded text or italicized unless you use some of the JAWS commands that will give that information, such as insert F as in font. So if we set up a speech and sound scheme or use one of the pre-built speech and sound schemes to do this, as you're reading through that document, JAWS could automatically tell you when the font changes from one size to another, or it might read the text that's bolded in a different voice or the underlined text in a different voice. It could do different things based on that scheme that is set up. Another example would be if we're moving through a dialog box and JAWS will speak the control type and the control state. So in other words, if it's a checkbox, it might tell you that it's checked or unchecked, or tell you that a button is a button. Those kinds of things, a speech and sound scheme can be used to use other words or other voices to communicate those things, like the fact that it's a checkbox, or even sound effects that are built into JAWS that can do that. So I think the best way to fully understand how this works is actually to show some examples. So there are quite a few pre-built sound schemes that are available. Most people just don't know that and don't know how to change them. I've got Google Chrome open and I'm on a web page with JAWS. I'm using Eloquence for this demonstration. And normally as we move through a web page with JAWS, it's going to tell us different information about what we're moving across. So it will identify a link by using the word link. It will identify a heading by saying the word heading. A graphic will be identified by the word graphic. All of those are keywords that we're used to hearing all the time with JAWS so that it can tell us about what the element is. I'll just quickly down arrow a little bit through the web page.
For over 20 years, Freedom Scientific has provided access to this designed to promote independence about what we do and committed to the heading Level 2 software solutions. Freedom Scientific provides software or Magna software to link view software solutions.
So there's a link, JAWS says link, and then it read the name of the link, software solutions. If I press the letter H,
Low Vision Solutions heading Level 2.
JAWS jumped to the next heading. It read the text and it said that it's a heading level 2. So those words like link and heading level 2 are things we're just used to hearing. But there's a particular scheme that's been pre-built for us that will communicate these things help us understand what's a link and what's a heading without using those particular words. It's actually going to use different voices to read different types of elements. So let's learn how to switch to it. The keystroke to open the list of schemes that are available is Alt Insert S as in scheme. So Alt Insert S, I'm going to press it now.
Select the scheme dialog. List 1, list view, classic, 8 of 25.
And this is the select a scheme dialog. So there's a list here of all of the schemes that are currently available to you. Mine is set to one called Classic right now, and it said that it's 8 out of 25. So if I start scrolling down the list, I could start seeing some of the different schemes that are already available to me.
Classic with flows to and flows from, 9 of 25. Colors, 10 of 25. Indent left parent tab is 0.125 inches. Script managed.
So each of these schemes here that's built for us has different characteristics. So the one called colors, for example, is going to have JAWS communicate color changes. When it's reading through text that changes colors, it's going to tell us those different colors. You could scroll through this list, and some of these will be quite obvious what they do just by the name of them. There's quite a few called classic that have some other info spoken. So I'm actually going to scroll up and let's look at a couple of those.
Colors, classic with classic, 8 of 25. Classic with quotes, 7 of 25. Classic left parent attributes, font and color right parents. Classic left parent attributes right parent, 5 of 25.
So the ones that start with the word classic are just the normal JAWS behavior, but they're adding in additional things. So classic with attributes is going to give you some of the font information, for example, and help you know what the font is as you're scrolling through a document or moving through text. But the one that I'm looking for that is specifically pre-built for the web is at the bottom of the list. So I'm going to press the End key to move to the bottom.
End, word classic, 25 of 25.
And I'm going to up arrow.
Web rent a crowd, 24 of 25.
Here it is, the second to the last one. It's called Web Rent a Crowd. Web Rent a Crowd. So it's actually going to use some of the different voices to speak the different types of information on the web page. So I'll go ahead and press enter, or you could tab to the OK button to choose this scheme.
Enter, switch to scheme web rent a crowd.
Okay, I'm going to press Control Home to go back to the top of the page and just start scrolling down.
Freedom Scientific N-I-quality video.
So now I'll press down arrow.
Skip to content.
Aha, and now we heard the word skip to content in a totally different voice. That voice is indicating to me that that is a link, and the text of the link is skip to content.
Graphic visited Freedom Scientific.
Graphic visited Freedom Scientific. I'll keep scrolling down. Let's just get a sense of what is being spoken and how it's being spoken.
Call today.
1 left parent 800 right parent 444-4443.
Search : edit. Submit button. Navigation region. List of 8 items.
Visited home. Collapsed menu products. Collapsed menu software.
So as we're moving through these different links here, JAWS is not saying the word link anymore. It's just reading the text of the link in a different voice. But that different voice is what cues me that this is a link versus just regular text, which it was speaking in its normal eloquence voice.
Collapsed menu services. Collapsed menu support. Collapsed menu downloads. Find a dealer. Shop online.
List end. Navigation region end.
So now when I hear JAWS go back to its original voice, I know that that's not a link anymore. That's just some text or information JAWS is speaking.
Main region.
COVID-19 update.
So let's try to find out what headings are spoken as. So I'm going to press the letter H, which should jump me to the next heading on the page.
Empowering independence.
So this time we heard empowering independence, which is the text of the heading, but we heard it in a totally different voice. That voice is indicating to me that this is a heading. Now, JAWS did not say the word heading level 1. It said the text of the heading, but just in that different voice. I'll press H again.
Software solutions.
And again.
Low vision solutions.
Again.
Blindness solutions.
Again.
Upcoming events.
This time we heard upcoming events. But you might have noticed that it was a slightly different pitch than the other ones. It's still that same voice, but it's a slightly different pitch. And that's because it's a different heading level. So a heading level 1 is spoken in one voice. A heading level 2 is a slightly higher pitch. A heading level 3 is a little bit higher than that, and so on. So as I press H, I can tell that these are headings because JAWS is switching to this other voice.
Software releases. Contact us. Vispero Brands.
And it's actually, the pitch is getting a little bit higher because some of these headings are higher levels, level 3, level 4 headings, for example. So the Web Rent a Crowd scheme changes the way JAWS communicates information. It's actually much less words spoken to me as the user as I move around the page, because JAWS is not having to say link or heading level 1. It's using these different voices to communicate that same information. So once I got used to what these voices mean, which one indicates which thing, then it can be more efficient for me to navigate that web page without hearing some of those extra words. I'm going to bring up the schemes list again and switch it back to classic. So I'm going to press Alt, insert S.
Select the scheme dialog. List 1, list view. Web rent a crowd.
And now I'm going to press C until I find classic, and I'll switch it back to its default behavior.
Classic left parent attributes. Classic left parent attribute. Classic left parent attribute. Classic with quotes. Classic 8 of 25.
And I'll press enter.
Enter. Switch to scheme classic. Link graphic enhanced vision.
And now JAWS has switched back to its normal thing. So it's a great way to practice moving between different schemes by pressing Alt, Insert S. Try a scheme out if you can't tell what it does or are curious about it. And then you can always switch back to that original scheme as well. These schemes follow the same concept in JAWS that you can have different ones for different applications. So I could have a certain scheme active in Microsoft Excel, a totally different one active in Word, and a whole different one in Chrome, for example. So for every application that you could have a different scheme set up for that application if you want. Let's look at another one that I think can sometimes be useful, and then we'll look at how to create or customize your own scheme. I'm going to switch over to Microsoft Word, which I have open in the background.
Document 1-Word. Document 1 Word.
And I have some text written here, a couple of lines of text, and I'm going to just have JAWS read it with its default scheme right now.
After reaching the top of the mountain, Ryan said, "Wow, that was a long climb up." He then asked, "How long can we stay before heading back down?"
So this is some text here. It has some punctuation. It has some of that text is in quotation marks, but it all sounds the same to me as the JAWS user because JAWS is not set to speak those punctuation marks or those quotation marks. But there's a scheme here that's already predefined for us that will have JAWS speak any text in quotes with a slightly different pitch or a different way to hear it. So let's try that scheme out and see how this works. I'm going to press Alt Insert S.
Select the scheme dialog. List 1, list view. Word Classic 25 of 25.
Now we can see here for me, my default scheme in Microsoft Word is called Word Classic. I'm going to find the one that's called Classic with quotes. So I'm going to press C until I find that.
Classic attributes and font in. Classic attributes. Classic attributes. Classic with quotes 7 of 25.
And I'll press Enter to activate it.
Switch to scheme Classic with quotes. Edit.
Now I'm going to reread this text, and we're going to hear the text that's in quotation marks with a slightly different voice.
After reaching the top of the mountain, Ryan said, "Wow, that was a long climb up." He then asked, "How long can we stay before heading back down?"
So this time, the words that were in quotes were spoken with a slightly different pitch, and that was a good clue to me as I'm listening that text was in quotation marks. I don't have to turn on my punctuation and force JAWS to say left quote or right quote. It also just kind of brings it alive a little bit. So if you're reading through a book, for example, that has a lot of dialogue back and forth, it can be handy to have that dialogue spoken in a different voice or a different pitch so that you can easily tell what text is in quotes and then what text is not in quotes. So let's work now to learn how to modify a scheme or set up your own scheme. As I said, you can modify the pre-built schemes or you can actually create your own from scratch. What we're going to do for this example is use the classic scheme that's already pre-built, the default scheme, but we're going to change the way JAWS speaks the information about checkboxes. So let's review first how JAWS normally speaks information about a checkbox. It normally says the name of the checkbox, and it says the word checkbox, and then it says if that checkbox is checked or unchecked. So for example, it might say, "Today is Monday, checkbox, unchecked," or checked. And so what we're going to do now is modify this scheme. And instead of telling us whether it's checked or unchecked, we're going to have JAWS use a sound to indicate that. So one sound will indicate when the checkbox is checked. Another will indicate when it's unchecked. Before we do that, let's just see this in action as far as the default behavior. So I'm going to quickly open up the Microsoft Word options dialog. And again, if you're doing this in another program, it's perfectly fine as long as you can get to a checkbox. But I'm going to press Alt F to open the backstage view and then up arrow to options and press enter on it.
Alt F. Menu, home. Leaving menus, back. Options. List box word options, general 1 of 11.
Now I'm in the Microsoft Word options dialog. I'm going to press tab and there's a few checkboxes coming up here.
User interface. Show mini toolbar on selection checkbox checked.
So that said, show menu toolbar on selection, checkbox checked. So those words at the end, checkbox tells me this is a checkbox, and then it said checked, which tells me that this particular one is checked.
Enable live preview checkbox checked. Update document content while dragging checkbox checked.
So all three of these are checked. If I get to one that's not checked, JAWS would say not checked. So I'm going to press escape to close this, and then we'll change this scheme to have JAWS communicate that information via sound, and we'll come back here and try it again.
Escape.
So in order to edit the schemes, you have to go into Settings Center and then access the Speech and Sounds Manager that way. So I'm going to press Insert and the number 6 on my main keyboard to go directly to Settings Center. You could also press Insert F2 and choose Settings Center that way.
Word-JAWS Settings Center dialog. Search box edit.
And I'll press Control-Shift-D to make sure I'm in the default Settings Center file.
JAWS Settings Center default left pair in all app.
My cursor is on the search box, so rather than down arrow through all the settings and look for the one called Speech and Sound Schemes, I'm going to type in the word scheme, S-C-H-E-M-E, and that will quickly refine the results here to find scheme.
Speech and sound schemes. 1 of 6 search results. Scheme. 6 search results list box. Speech and sound schemes.
So here's speech and sound schemes, and I'll press F6 now to move over to the area where all the settings are laid out here in Settings Center.
Speech and sound schemes page. Active speech and sound scheme combo box. Classic 2 of 24.
So this tells me which one is currently active potentially. It's a list of all the different ones, again, like I had before. But this time there's actually an edit box that has a description of that scheme. And this could be useful if you want to read a little description about what the different ones are. So if I press tab.
Scheme description read only edit. JAWS will behave like prior versions with format and text options switched off and text options.
So this is just a read only edit box. You can up and down arrow and JAWS will read you the pre-built description for that. But I'm going to press tab again.
Modify schemes ... button.
And I'm going to activate the Modify Schemes button. This will let me get into the editor where we can change what the schemes do.
Space, Classic - Modify Schemes dialog. Select scheme : combo box. Classic 2 of 24.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the classic scheme. That's just the default normal JAWS behavior. And I'm going to edit that scheme to make it treat checkboxes differently, and then I'll give it a new name. So since classic is already selected, I'm going to press tab.
Scheme description : read only edit.
There's that description edit.
Edit selected scheme button.
And here's the button that says edit selected scheme. So I'll press spacebar.
Space, modify schemes - classic dialog. Classic - edit scheme dialog. General page, general page.
And now we have a multi-page dialog that's opened up with all the different settings about this particular scheme. So there's quite a few tabs here, and you could explore most of these on your own. I'm just going to briefly highlight a few of them. So the general tab is where that description is located.
Blank.
I'm going to press Shift Tab to move to the tabs and then right arrow across.
General tab. Control type tab.
Control type. This is where we can define different things about how JAWS will speak a control type. And I'm going to press the right arrow to move to the next one.
Control state tab.
Control state. This is going to have information about the state of a control, whether something is checked or unchecked, or highlighted or not highlighted, or active or inactive. Let's press tab here and move to the list.
List 1, list view. Less required, greater speak control state using normal voice. 1 of 29.
So there's already about 29 different things here. And as I scroll down the list,
App CTL ignore. 2 of 29. Check speak control state using normal voice. 3 of 29.
Okay, this one right here says checked speak control voice using normal voice. So this one is defining that when something is checked, JAWS is just going to say the word checked, and it's going to use its normal voice. It's not going to try to switch voices or do something different when something is checked. So we're going to come back to this one, but I'll down arrow.
Closed speak control state using normal voice. Collapsed speak control state using normal voice.
So most of these are all going to just be speak control state using normal voice, because that's just the default JAWS functionality. It's not set by default to do different voices or speak things in different ways. So you could scroll through this entire list and see all the different types of states that you could modify how JAWS communicates that. But I'm going to scroll back up to the one that said checked.
Closed speak control. Check speak control state using normal voice. 3 of 29.
And I'm going to press tab.
Speak control state radio button checked. 1 of 3.
So here's a radio button that defines what will JAWS do. So the one that it's set on now
Speak control state radio button checked 1 of 3.
is speak control state. But if I down arrow,
Play sound radio button checked 2 of 3. Ignore radio button checked 3 of 3.
there's play sound or ignore. Well, I don't want JAWS to ignore it. I actually want it to play a sound to indicate to me that something is checked. So I'm going to go scroll back up.
Play sound radio button checked 2 of 3.
And now I'm going to press tab.
Select wave file button.
And this lets me open up a dialog where I can pick the sound that would get played.
Space. Edit scheme dash classic dialog. Select sound dialog. List 1 list view. Ascend.wav 1 of 209.
So these are over 200 different sounds that are built into JAWS. You could scroll through the list. If you want to hear what they sound like, you just press spacebar on any of them. So let's hear what this first one sounds like. Ascend.
Space.
So this is actually the one I'm going to use because it helps me understand that that is open or checked. There's another one called descend that we'll use for a checkbox that's not checked. So since ascend is the sound that I want, I'm going to press enter.
Enter. Modify schemes dash classic dialog. Classic dash edit scheme dialog. Control state page. Control state page. Select wave file button.
Okay, now I'm back on the select wave file. So now anytime I get to a checkbox that is checked, I'm going to hear that sound played instead of JAWS telling me that the checkbox is actually checked. So I'm going to shift tab.
Play sound radio button checked. List 1 list view. Checked play sound ascend.wav 3 of 29.
And now we heard JAWS say,
Checked play sound ascend.wav 3 of 29.
checked play sound ascend.wav. So at any time that something is checked, it says now it's going to play a sound called ascend.wav rather than speaking it, for example. Let's press the end key and go down to the bottom of the list and just see what's down at the bottom.
End. Visited speak control state using normal voice 29 of 29. Unchecked speak control state using normal voice 28 of 29.
And here right at the bottom, we have unchecked. And right now, of course, it's set to just speak the state using the normal voice. I'm going to change this to play a different sound when something is unchecked. So I'll press tab.
Speak control state radio button checked.
And I'll change the radio button to play a sound.
Play sound radio button checked.
Now I'll tab over to the button to let me select which sound is played.
Select wave file button. Space. Edit scheme dash classic dialog. Select sound dialog.
So now I'm back on the list of all the different sound effects. I've already decided that I want to use the one called descending. So I'm going to press D to find it.
Deadbolt close.wav. Deadbolt open. Descend.wav 46 of 209.
There it is, descend. I'll press spacebar to hear it to make sure that's what I wanted.
Space.
Yep, that's the one I want. So now I'll press enter.
Enter. Modify schemes dash classic dialog. Classic dash edit scheme dialog.
And now I will shift tab back to the list of all the different attributes.
Play sound list 1 list view. Unchecked play sound descend.wav 28 of 29.
So it confirmed that for something that's unchecked, it's going to play that particular sound. So I will shift tab once more to go back to the list of tabs, and I'll just make a brief note about some of the other tabs and other things you could change.
Control state tab. Attributes tab.
Attributes, this is where you can change or have JAWS speak different information. In fact, I'll just press tab.
List 1 list view. Speak attribute using message voice 1 of 18. Bold italic underline strikeout graphic highlight unselected double strikeout superscript sub. Bold italic underline strikeout graphic highlight unselect default ignore for deletion speak attribute using message voice. Grammar speak attribute using message voice.
So this is where we can deal with things like things that are text that is bolded or underlined or italicized, grammar. All these things are predefined here, and we could change how JAWS will behave. I'm going to shift tab.
Attributes tab.
And then right arrow.
Font name tab.
Font name. So if we wanted to define that JAWS would speak or give certain information on a particular font, like Times New Roman, for example, we could set a rule up here.
Font size tab.
Font size. So we could have JAWS react differently when it gets to font with different sizes. So if, for example, we wanted JAWS to speak any font that was an 18 point a different way, we could set that up.
Color tab.
Same thing with color. We can define what JAWS would do when it gets to fonts with different color.
Indentation tab.
Indentation.
Misc tab.
And then miscellaneous.
List 1 list view. All caps speak text using all caps voice 1 of 7.
And there's several things here in the miscellaneous section to help us determine some things that may not have fit in some of the other categories. So since I've changed the way JAWS communicates the checked or unchecked state, I'm just going to let that be my change. So I'm going to tab until I get to the OK button.
Speak text with select voice OK button. Enter. Default left parent all applications right parent dash JAWS settings center dialog. Classic dash modify schemes dialog. Edit selected scheme button.
So now I've edited the classic scheme. Now I'm not going to save it because I don't want to override the classic scheme. I'm actually going to choose save as and give it a new name. So I'll press tab.
Save selected scheme button. Save selected scheme as button.
Here it is, save selected scheme as. So because I don't want to override the default one.
Space. Modify schemes dash classic dialog. Save as dialog. File name : edit.
So now I need to give it a name. I'm going to call it Ryan dash checkbox.
Ryan dash dash.
And I'll press enter.
Checkbox. Enter. Default left parent all applications right parent dash JAWS settings center dialog. Classic dash modify schemes dialog. Save selected scheme as button.
Okay, so now I'm back here on the save as. So I'm going to press tab.
Ryan dash checkbox dash modify schemes dialog. Create new scheme button.
There's a button where I could create a brand new scheme if I wanted to start from scratch.
Delete selected scheme button.
Here's the button to let me delete a scheme.
OK button.
But I'm going to choose OK because I'm finished here.
Enter. Speech and sound schemes page. Modify schemes ... button. JAWS settings center dialog. Do you want to make Ryan dash checkbox the active scheme for default left parent all applications right parent?
So this is asking me now, do I want to make this new scheme the default one for all applications? I'm going to tell it no.
No button. Space. Speech and sound schemes page. Modify schemes ... button.
Okay, now I'm back on the settings center screen. So I'm going to press F6 and then tab over to OK to close out of settings center.
6 search results. Read only. OK button. Space. Document one word. Word options. Update document content.
Okay, now I'm back in Microsoft Word.
Enable live pre.
And I'm going to now
Escape. Edit.
make sure I'm going to reopen the options dialog.
Alt F. Menu. Leaving options. List box word options. Word.
And now before I tab through, I need to change to the new scheme that I just created. So I'm going to press Alt Insert S.
Word options dialog. Select the scheme dialog. List one list view. Classic with quotes.
And now I'm going to press R to find the new one I created.
Ryan checkbox. 3 of 26.
There it is. So I'll press enter.
Switch to scheme Ryan checkbox. General 1 of 11.
And I'll press tab until I get to the checkboxes.
User interface options. Show mini toolbar on selection checkbox. Enable live preview checkbox. Update document content while dragging checkbox.
So this time, as I got to these checkboxes, JAWS did not say that it was checked or unchecked. It's playing the sound. That sound I'm hearing now is the one that I chose for when it's checked. Let's tab until I find one that's not checked so I can hear the other sound.
Collapse the ribbon automatically checkbox.
There it is. That one, collapse the ribbon automatically, is unchecked because that's the slightly different pitch of that sound. So now I'm not hearing those words checked or unchecked. I'm hearing the sounds. In fact, I'll press Shift Tab so we can hear it again.
Update document content while dragging checkbox.
That one's checked.
Collapse the ribbon automatically checkbox.
That one's unchecked. I could have even in the speech and sound schemes dialog told JAWS to not even tell me that it's a checkbox because that sound, whichever one, checked or unchecked, actually communicates to me that it is a checkbox. So I could have even told JAWS, don't even say that it's a checkbox because I'm going to know that anyway by hearing that sound. So again, that's just another way to make yourself more efficient in using some sounds to communicate things rather than listening to JAWS tell you the words. So I'm going to press Escape to close the options.
Escape. Edit.
And then I'm going to go ahead and switch back now to the Word Classic scheme, which is what I started with. So I'll press Alt Insert S.
Select the scheme dialog.
And I'll go to the bottom of my list with the End key.
End. Word Classic.
There it is, Word Classic.
Switch to scheme Word Classic. Edit.
And now JAWS is back to its default behavior, which is to not tell me the font info or to not read things in quotes with the different voice, and also to not use those sounds. So it's very easy to switch in and out of the different schemes. The pre-built ones are already there with a lot of information. I like some of the ones that are built to communicate the font and style info, especially if you're reading a paper, if you're proofreading something that you've created. Maybe you're using APA style and you have to really be conscientious about the fonts and whether things are indented a certain way. Those are great times to use these different schemes to help tell you what the font is doing and what the size of the font is, for example, as you read through the text. So hopefully this is helpful. Play around with it, use your imagination, and make yourself more efficient.
Freedom Scientific, a Vispero brand. To stay up to date on upcoming webinars and training events, complete the sign-up form at freedomscientific.com/webinars. Thanks again for connecting with us.